BRICS agreed upon settlement token called the unit. Let me back up and kind of lay the foundation for it. So there was the G7 meeting in Italy not too long ago that coincided with the BRICS meeting in Novigrad. And the Saudis were invited to the G7 meeting in Italy, and they turned it down. They said, no, we can't make it. But they sent their delegates to Novigrad, to the BRICS meeting, where we see Dilma Rousseff, the former president of Brazil. Well, she comes out and she says, we've agreed in principle to a new settlement currency. It was done on the sidelines at this meeting with Sergei Glaziev and Vladimir Putin. And the reason I've been saying for almost 4 years that there would be a common settlement currency with the BRICS is because Glaziev has told us that for almost 4 years in dozens and dozens and dozens of interviews. That he was the architect of it, the Eurasian Economic Union financial minister, and the architect of a basket of commodities and a basket of currencies. And this is the way we're going. And it made a lot of sense. I've talked about it a lot. Well, last year, and by the way, when Dilma said this, she said, we've agreed to this new settlement token called the unit, which will be 40% gold backed, 60% a basket of BRICS plus currencies. They didn't say a basket of commodities the way that Glaziev had originally said. They said just a basket of gold. Now, gold, by the way, was the only other tier one reserve asset, is reclassified by the Bank of International Settlements in 2019. And the central banks have been buying it at a level the world has never seen. There's been over 40 banks that have repatriated all of their gold from the New York Fed, which gave access for the last, I don't know how many years, 50 years, to the COMEX, and the Bank of England, which always gave access to the LBMA, the two primary trading hubs in the world. All of these countries would leave their gold with the safety of the Bank of England and the New York Fed, with the ability to trade on those two platforms whenever they wanted. Over 40 banks have brought their money home from these places, and the easy way to brush it off is to say, well, that's because of weaponization of the treasury market. People want it in their own possession. Well, that's only part of it. The unit token says that it will be minted within the countries that possess the gold, within the borders of the countries that possess the gold, and have it independently and continuously audited. That's why a lot of these countries have brought their gold back. So this was something that was really accelerating. She said it would be traded over Project mBridge, which I've talked about for over a year. Project mBridge is a cross-border payment system that was developed by China, Hong Kong, Thailand, and the United Arab Emirates. And it was also done in coordination with the Bank of International Settlements Innovation Hub. And I've always thought about that it was kind of strange that the BIS would be involved with the BRICS, as the BIS is largely a Western institution. But my mind always glossed over that. And I would argue that was a mistake of mine. I thought it was interesting, but I'll get to this in a second, kind of frame it the right way. It became even more interesting when Saudi Arabia became the fifth full participant in mBridge. They had 30 or 40 observational participants, but you had 5 full-time participants, including Saudi Arabia. Now, mBridge is not compatible with the dollar. And if we are being told from the former president of Brazil, Dilma Rousseff, and she's the head of the BRICS New Development Bank, it's not a small fry. We've agreed in principle to a new settlement token called the unit, 40% gold, 60% BRICS currencies, traded over mBridge, and the SWIFT system is not compatible. So no SWIFT interference, no US interference. It gives them the ability to trade without having to go through the SWIFT system. Central bank digital currencies, and then a settlement token. So the idea was each country will trade back and forth their local currencies, keeping their own monetary house in order. Rupee for ruble, yuan for real, whatever it may be. And then the ability, if, for example, I have too much rupee, I don't want anymore, or maybe I just want something different for selling you my energy or my commodities, I want the unit token. Great, we've agreed upon it in principle. So this was all really interesting. Isn't the BIS a Western institution? And it, ding, 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 in my head, I'm like, yeah, I've always thought that, but I guess I looked past it. That was a mistake. And we're talking back and forth, and, you got the Fed, who has initiated Project Cedar and Project Agora. These are their CBDC payment systems, cross-border payment systems, similar to mBridge. And we're talking, I said, it's interesting. I said, the BRICS just had their big meeting, and they were talking a lot about the WHO, the United Nations, the IMF, the BIS. It's as if they want to integrate with the West. And I said to her, maybe it was these big bankers who've controlled the world forever. Maybe it was their realization that, well, they can't have one world currency like they've always wanted to have, but maybe a one world digital platform that they can control So they helped develop Enbridge, and they're also, of course, with Project Cedar and Agora. So they'll pull the strings from above, and maybe there's a couple of currencies, settlement currencies or central bank digital currencies of other nations, but we can control the pathways. And yeah, that makes sense, but I don't know. Well, let me get to the point, what I'm getting at here. What just happened by the BIS, I find to be an indictment of the West. It's right out of a James Bond movie. It's espionage, as far as I'm concerned. Enbridge, which would trade the new settlement token, was developed by China, Hong Kong, Thailand, UAE, and Saudi Arabia just became the 5th full-time member, backed by the BIS Innovation Hub. So this has been going on for 4 years, the development of this program, and the technology primarily comes from China. So you have a State Department official who comes out in conjunction with the BRICS meeting, and he says, alternatives to the SWIFT system and the undermining of the dollar's role threaten global democracy. What? Like, if that's not quite a statement to say that any alternative to the SWIFT system and the dollar's global role threaten global democracy. Paul Krugman, the talking head economist, he says, de-dollarization is in fact impossible because there just aren't any good alternatives. So you got Paul Krugman, this knucklehead, saying there aren't any good alternatives, and the State Department comes out and says alternatives to the SWIFT system and undermining the dollar's role threaten global democracy. Well, that goes back and forth, kind of contradicts one another. There are no good alternatives, but if any alternatives threaten global democracy, we have a problem with that. So let's get back to the story. You have this guy named Augustus Carstens. He reminds me of Augustus from Willy Wonka, only grown up. Looks just like him. And he says, we cannot directly support, he's the head of the general manager of the BIS. We cannot directly support any project for the BRICS because we cannot operate with countries that are subject to sanctions. I want to be very clear about that. Then you get Agatha Demarius, a senior policy fellow at the European Council of Foreign Relations. In the long run, there is no doubt that mechanisms like BRICS Bridge could be useful for China, Russia, or others to hide sensitive transactions from Western authorities. The underlying technology is in fact a tool to circumvent sanctions and potentially undermine the dollar's dominance in the global financial system. I mean, you want to talk about gross? The BIS wants to pull the plug on Enbridge after 4 years of development, knowing it was for the BRICS to trade outside the SWIFT system. And at the 12th hour, after they've announced it, launched it, and it's operational, they say, no, we can't do this because Russia's being sanctioned, Iran is being sanctioned, we can't be part of this. Where the hell have they been for the last 4 years? Why was this not brought up before the big BRICS meeting, before it was launched, before they tell the world we have a settlement currency? It's right out of a James Bond movie. It is flat out espionage as far as I'm concerned. And they just figured this out. What this is going to do is crystallize the resolve of these countries. Why would they ever want to hold our treasuries when we can do this last minute, underhanded, dirty thing, saying, well, the BIS can't stand behind the BRICS doing this and their ability to trade free from SWIFT because it undermines, because they're being sanctioned by the West. But the sanctions on the West, by the West, are what is the rallying cry for the rest of the world. Look, it's okay for us to give $200 billion to the Ukraine and without congressional oversight, Stinger missiles and F-16 jets, but it's not okay for, China to give any help to Russia, where Janet Yellen says to CNN, we're okay with Xi Jinping and Putin being buddies, but if she gives 1 penny to Russia and the Russian war machine will sanction their banks, their companies, and Beijing itself. It's the hypocrisy that these countries say this is ridiculous, that they feel that it doesn't matter what we do. It doesn't matter that we invaded Iraq 20 years ago under false pretenses, never found weapons. So they've officially applied to BRICS. They're kicking Western coalition forces out of the country. They've made trading in dollars illegal, and there are no banks left in Iraq that hold any green dollar bills. As of January of last year, they're gone because of this. So what I'm getting at is that what the BIS just did, which is a Western institution, is exactly why these countries are aligning. Yes, it will certainly set them back a bit, but I do believe that it will only reinforce the reasons why they are banding together. The famous commodity trader in Wall Street, he says, well, I'm related to the Goldmans and Goldman Sachs, and they told me there would be 2 resets. The first one is man-made. Now, I would argue, Dunnigan, that we are in the midst of that man-made reset right now because it's just too stupid to be stupid, or as Bill would say, too stupid to not be planned. All the stuff that we see around us is just too stupid to not be stupid. I mean, it's just stupid, all the stuff we see. And he said that will fail, and when the second reset comes at the behest of Mother Nature, the U.S. government will confiscate everything that is not American-made. The Boston Fed created a CBDC with the help of Lael Brainerd. I know she was overseeing it. They have a couple of CBDC projects. I think one is called Project Cedar. And there's another one that it was used for, that's a wholesale CBDC, central bank to central bank. And there was another one, I forgot the name, that was more of a retail CBDC that they're working on. I've never heard them say they were going to peg it to gold. I do know the IMF, which is a Western friendly entity, they keep talking about or hinting at it. So I would assume that, when the head of the IMF, as I mentioned, Kristalina Georgieva, says a CBDC not pegged to something is fiat, talking about the virtues of gold in that report she wrote or they wrote earlier in the year. I think they understand that we've reached a point on the road where if you don't peg it, it will be laughed at. It will not be adopted unless through force. And that's really all that the dollar is right now, more or less, is something backed by the faith and credit. We're broke, we're insolvent. And what faith do we have any longer with all of the question marks about what we've talked about so much about what's happening in this country? And, the rest of the world is wondering what is happening in that country. And everyone's wondering what happens if there's questions, there's civil war type of question. Doug Casey's writing reports about there's going to be a civil war. It's like, where are we? This is a country that was admired so incredibly strong for the virtues of religion and judicial system and elections and all of these things that we held so close, freedom in general. And you have to wonder if all of these things are being thrown to the wind, and the rest of the world is. So yeah, I think they will have to peg it to something. Project Enbridge would work with a Western CBDC. It would, 100%. It is a very adaptable technology, I guess is the way they say it, in that it will accept central bank digital currencies, all of them. And that's the key to understanding what's happening with BRICS, by the way, is not a common currency. It's a common settlement currency. So every one of these countries will trade their own CBDC over Enbridge. That's the idea. Every country will have a CBDC. If you take all of the gross domestic product of the world, and 99% of the countries that make that up, they all have a CBDC in operation or development, near operation. They're all going in that direction. You go to the BIS website and look at their innovation hub, and they have all, in fact, this is one of the ones that Rob talks about. They have all of these projects that they are working on to address any possible problem, including a power outage, a grid down, a failure with the system, different currencies, different commodities, all of these things they are working on. We are heading in that direction. At this point, it's important to note that the dollar is not compatible with Enbridge. The SWIFT system is not compatible with Enbridge, but a CBDC that the West would create would be. And, the whole thing with Enbridge is that it will make it so that not any one entity can control the narrative. You cannot sanction over Enbridge. And it just makes it so that the West will not be able to impose their will by cutting people off of the SWIFT system. And if more and more and more countries are going to move in this direction and use things like Enbridge for oil, and it's very important to note that Saudi Arabia just became a full participant in Enbridge. It seems to me they have full intentions of moving in this direction. The oil producing countries, United Arab Emirates is one of the producers or the original designers of Enbridge. They're the 7th largest producer of oil in the world. OPEC member just joined the BRICS. We are moving in this direction. And so, yeah, I think that by hook or crook, assuming that we would be welcomed, we could see a CBDC that would trade on Enbridge. But we're a long ways away from that, not only in our relationship with those countries, but also in just the outright development and announcement of a Western CBDC. And I think we have to have some event first that leads us to roll that out. I've talked about that forever. Could it be as mundane as revaluing the price of gold, as the Dutch National Bank, head of the Dutch National Bank said, or Senator Cynthia Lummis talked about? Maybe. Or could it be more scary, as Mike Adams, Operation Sandman, talks about? Everyone has already, it's preordained. They're going to dump at some point and create that moment that we've talked about, the hyperinflationary tsunami where interest rates go to the moon to compensate and blow up the whole system. Don't know. But yeah, I think let me put it this way. The technology is there whereby any CBDC would be compatible. And the question is, would we be welcomed, or would we have a system that would be more Western oriented? Would it be the G7 and the IMF behind it? What Enbridge and the unit and the BIS ultimately want is a one world currency that we've heard forever. A world that is controlled by, one group of people pulling the strings way up high. And that's ultimately what they're talking about. Indeed, if the West were using Enbridge like bricks, you're that much closer to a one world currency. If you have, the West and the East now using the same system, which, when you look at it from the standpoint of where we are right now, it's hard to believe, but take a step back and, like the BIS is not, they're consulting with Enbridge. They're not part of it. They didn't develop it. So, I'm not exactly sure how this all plays out, but I will tell you that the technology would work and it would be a much better world if we were all using it, at least in terms of, the geopolitical outlook, but I wouldn't say that's a slam dunk. And if you Google Murray, you'll see he was a famous commodity trader in Wall Street that was involved in unwinding the Hunt brothers position. He said, I went to elementary school, Catholic school, was picked on for being Jewish. So when I went to middle school in another town, I changed my name to Sinclair, took my mom's maiden name. He says, but I said, okay, well, why are you telling me this? He says, well, I'm related to the Goldmans and Goldman Sachs. And they told me there would be 2 resets. The first one is man-made. Now, I would argue, Dunnigan, that we are in the midst of that man-made reset right now because it's just too stupid to be stupid. Or as Bill would say, too stupid to not be planned. All the stuff that we see around us is just too stupid to not be stupid. I mean, it's just stupid, all the stuff we see. And he said that will fail. And when the second reset comes at the behest of Mother Nature, the U.S. government will confiscate everything that is not American-made. Take it for what it's worth. I still own stuff that isn't American-made, but I have traded a lot of my bars for American Eagles, and I lost a lot of silver. In terms of gold, I pretty much only and have always only owned American coins, either pre-33 or Eagles or Buffaloes. But, there are reasons to own the American coins for sure. That would be one of them, if you believe it. I know Bill Holter believes it, and I know Jim believed it. I can't vouch for its validity, but with the legal tender laws being passed, with the performance of the U.S. Mint during the pandemic versus everything else, I would normally say, no, that's stupid. You're going to lose gold and silver. But I would honestly say to you now that I understand it and I would contemplate it.